The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Taylor, Texas, as Theresa Greene's horse thundered toward the canyon edge, pursued by three riders whose intentions were as dark as the approaching night. It was 1875, and the West was still wild enough to swallow a woman whole without leaving so much as a whisper behind. Theresa pulled hard on the reins as her chestnut mare, Penny, slid to a halt mere feet from the cliff's edge. Dust billowed around them, momentarily concealing her from her pursuers. The bandits had been trailing her since she'd left the bank with the funds to save her father's ranch. $500 in her saddlebag, the difference between keeping their home and losing everything. "There's nowhere to run now, lady," the leader's gravelly voice carried over the canyon. Theresa's heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned for an escape route. To her left, a narrow trail snaked down the cliff face. Without hesitation, she guided Penny toward it, praying the mare's sure-footedness would see them through. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horse. Halfway down, a rifle shot cracked the air. Penny reared in terror, and Theresa felt herself being thrown from the saddle. She tumbled, managing to grasp the edge of the cliff as her body swung out into open air. Her fingers dug into the crumbling earth, rocks and dirt cascading into the chasm below. Penny scrambled away, finding her footing on the trail and continuing downward without her rider. "Help!" Theresa screamed, though she knew no friendly ears would hear. Her arms burned with the effort of supporting her weight. The saddlebag with the money had fallen with her and now hung precariously from her shoulder, making it even harder to hold on. Above her, she heard the bandits cursing. They wouldn't risk the narrow path on horseback, but that wouldn't stop them for long. Theresa's fingers began to slip. Loose stones cut into her skin as she desperately tried to find better purchase. Then came the sound of the hoofbeats different from her pursuers. A shadow fell across her as a rider approached the cliff edge. "Hang on!" a deep voice called out. Looking up, Theresa saw the silhouette of a man against the crimson sky. He dismounted in one fluid motion and dropped to his stomach at the edge of the cliff, extending his arm toward her. Hanging from the cliff by her fingertips, Theresa watched as the cowboy reached down and said, "I've got you." Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them, something beyond the desperation of her situation. His eyes were the color of a summer storm, intense and unwavering. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his gaze held a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. "Take my hand," he urged. "I won't let you fall." Theresa hesitated. Her right hand was more secure than her left. If she let go to reach for him, a gunshot exploded nearby, and the decision was made for her. She released her left hand and swung it upward. Their fingers brushed, missed, then caught. His grip was iron-strong as he clasped her wrist. "I've got you now," he repeated more firmly this time. "Give me your other hand." With her heart in her throat, Theresa let go of the cliff with her right hand and grabbed his forearm. The cowboy braced himself and pulled, muscles straining beneath his worn shirt. Slowly, agonizingly, he drew her up until she could scramble over the edge and collapse beside him, gasping for breath. There was no time for relief. Another shot rang out, and dirt exploded near them. "My horse is just behind those rocks," the cowboy said, helping her to her feet. "Can you run?" Theresa nodded, clutching the saddlebag. They sprinted across the open ground as bullets kicked up dirt around them. The cowboy's horse, a magnificent black stallion, stood waiting, ears pricked toward the commotion. In one swift movement, the cowboy lifted Theresa into the saddle, then swung up behind her. He kicked the horse into motion, and they galloped away from the cliff edge, away from the bandits who were now scrambling to return to their mounts. "Hold on tight," he said, his breath warm against her ear as he urged the horse faster. His arms encircled her as he held the reins, creating a sanctuary of muscle and sinew that felt strangely familiar, though she'd never met this man before in her life. They rode hard for what seemed like hours, putting distance between themselves and the pursuers. When the cowboy finally slowed the horse to a walk, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only stars to light their way. "I think we've lost them," he said, easing his grip on the reins. "Are you hurt?" Theresa took stock of her body, feeling the ache in her shoulders and the sting of scraped palms. "Nothing serious," she replied. "Thank you. You saved my life." He nodded, guiding the horse toward a stand of trees where a small creek glimmered in the starlight. "My name's Vaughn Galloway." "Theresa Greene," she replied, suddenly aware of how she was pressed against him, how his arms still held her secure in the saddle. They reached the creek, and Vaughn dismounted before helping her down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Theresa felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the Texas heat. "We should rest here for the night," Vaughn said, leading his horse to drink. "Those men might still be looking for you. Mind telling me why they're so intent on catching you?" Theresa clutched the saddlebag tighter. "I've got $500 here, the last of our savings, meant to pay off my father's debts. Our ranch is struggling, and without this money, we'll lose everything." Vaughn nodded, his expression grave. "The Lazy J outfit?" "You know it?" Theresa asked, surprised. "Your father's James Greene?" At her nod, Vaughn continued. "I've heard of him. A good man, fair to his workers. Been having trouble since that new cattle baron moved in Russell, isn't it?" "Victor Russell," Theresa confirmed, the name bitter on her tongue. "He's been buying up all the water rights, driving up prices at every turn. Those men back there work for him, though they'd never admit it. He wants our land, and he's not above stealing to get it." Vaughn set about making a small camp, gathering wood for a fire. "We should keep it small," he said, "just enough to warm some coffee and see to those hands of yours." As the flames flickered to life, Theresa got her first clear look at her rescuer. Vaughn Galloway was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that spoke of years under the open sky. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it escaped from beneath his hat. A thin scar traced the line of his jaw on the right side, but it did nothing to diminish his handsome features. He caught her staring and offered a slight smile. "Let me see those hands." Theresa extended them, palm up, revealing the scrapes and cuts from her desperate grip on the cliff face. Vaughn produced a bandana from his pocket, dipped it in the creek, and gently began cleaning her wounds. "What brought you out that way?" Theresa asked, wincing slightly at his ministrations. "Not many folks ride that far from town without purpose." Vaughn's expression grew distant. "I was tracking someone, a man who, well, let's just say he and I have unfinished business." "You're not a lawman," Theresa observed. It wasn't a question. "No, madam, I'm not," Vaughn admitted, "but justice doesn't always wear a badge out here." The weight of his words hung between them. Theresa sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't press. They were still strangers, after all, thrown together by circumstance. "Your horse Penny, I heard you call her. She made it down the trail," Vaughn said, changing the subject. "She's likely headed back to your ranch. With any luck, your father will know something's wrong when she returns without you." "If the bandits don't catch her first," Theresa said worriedly. "They were after you, not the horse," Vaughn reasoned, "and from what I saw, that mare knows her way home." They shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack from Vaughn's saddlebags, washing it down with strong, bitter coffee. The night grew cool, and Vaughn offered Theresa his coat without comment. "We should reach Taylor by midday tomorrow," he said as they sat by the dying embers of the fire. "I'll see you safely back to your ranch." "You don't have to do that," Theresa protested. "You've already done more than enough." Vaughn's gaze was steady. "Those men will still be looking for you, and that money. I won't leave you to face them alone." There was something in his voice that brooked no argument, and Theresa found herself nodding in agreement. "Thank you, Mr. Galloway." "Vaughn," he corrected gently. "Out here, formalities seem a bit unnecessary, especially after what we've been through." "Vaughn," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. They settled down to sleep, Vaughn insisting Theresa take his bedroll while he kept watch. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her for a long time. Her mind kept replaying the moment when she dangled over the abyss, and Vaughn's strong hand had reached down to save her. The dawn came soft and pink, painting the sky in gentle hues that belied the danger they still faced. Vaughn was already up, his hat pulled low over his eyes as he scanned the horizon. "No sign of them," he reported when he noticed Theresa was awake. "But we should move quickly all the same." They made short work of breaking camp, and soon they were riding again, Theresa behind Vaughn on his stallion. The land spread out before them, vast and beautiful in the morning light. For all its dangers, Theresa couldn't help but love this rugged country. "You've lived here all your life?" Vaughn asked over his shoulder, seeming to sense her thoughts. "Born and raised on the Lazy J," she confirmed. "My mother died when I was 14, and it's been just Pa and me since then. The ranch is everything to us." Vaughn was quiet for a moment. "My family had a place in Colorado. Lost it when I was 16. Raiders came through during the war, took everything we had. My father tried to stop them." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Theresa instinctively tightened her arms around his waist, offering what comfort she could. "I've been on my own since then," he continued after a while. "Worked ranches from Montana to Texas, drove cattle, broke horses, never stayed anywhere too long." "And now you're tracking someone," Theresa ventured. She felt him tense slightly. "The man who led those raiders. Took me years to find his trail, but I'm close now. He's here in Taylor, or at least he was a week ago." "Is that why you helped me? Because you were already heading to Taylor?" Vaughn turned slightly in the saddle, enough to meet her eyes. "I helped you because you needed help, Miss Greene. Nothing more complicated than that." Something in his direct gaze made Theresa's heart skip a beat. She found herself believing him completely. As they rode, Vaughn pointed out signs of wildlife and native plants, sharing knowledge accumulated from years of wandering. Theresa found herself drawn to his quiet confidence, his easy way with the land and its creatures. By midday, the familiar outlines of Taylor appeared on the horizon. The small town had grown considerably in recent years, with the railroad's arrival bringing new prosperity and new troubles in equal measure. "We should avoid the main street," Vaughn suggested. "If Russell's men are looking for you, they'll have eyes in town." Theresa agreed, directing him toward a back route that would take them to the Lazy J without passing through the center of Taylor. They were just skirting the eastern edge of town when hoofbeats sounded behind them. Vaughn reacted instantly, urging his horse into a gallop. Theresa clung to him as they raced across open country, the pursuers gaining ground despite their efforts. "There's an old line shack about a quarter-mile ahead," Theresa shouted over the wind. "We might be able to hold them off there." Vaughn nodded and adjusted their course. The small wooden structure appeared, a lonely outpost against the vast landscape. They reached it just as the first shots rang out. Dismounting quickly, Vaughn helped Theresa inside before tethering his horse behind the building, where it would have some protection. The shack was sparse but sturdy, with thick walls and small windows that would be difficult for attackers to use. "5 of them," Vaughn reported, peering through a crack between the boards, "and they're spreading out to surround us." Theresa clutched the saddlebag, her knuckles white. "They won't stop until they get this money." Vaughn checked his revolver, a well-worn Colt that looked like it had seen its share of action. "Stay low and away from the windows. I've got 8 shots. Need to make them count," a voice called out from outside. "We know you're in there, Greene. Hand over the money and maybe we'll let you walk away." "That's Blackburn," Theresa whispered. "Russell's foreman. He's the one who chased me to the cliff yesterday." Vaughn's expression hardened. "They had their chance to talk yesterday. They chose bullets instead." He moved to one of the windows and fired a careful shot, answered immediately by a barrage from the attackers. Splinters flew as bullets struck the walls of the shack. "They're not looking to negotiate," Vaughn confirmed, ducking low. Theresa spotted a trap door in the floor, partially hidden by an old rug. "Vaughn, look! There might be a way out." They pulled back the rug to reveal the door, which opened onto a narrow space beneath the shack. It wasn't a proper cellar, but a shallow depression dug out for storage. "It's not big enough for both of us," Vaughn observed, "but you could fit. Take the money and stay hidden. I'll keep them busy as long as I can." "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Theresa protested. Another volley of shots peppered the shack. Vaughn grabbed Theresa's shoulders, his eyes intense. "This isn't about heroics. Your father needs that money and he needs you alive to bring it to him. I can handle myself." Before she could argue further, a new sound cut through the gunfire, the thunder of approaching horses. "That's a lot more than 5 riders," Vaughn said, moving back to the window. To their surprise, the newcomers weren't reinforcements for Blackburn. Through the dusty glass, they could see men wearing the familiar star of the Texas Rangers. "Rangers!" Vaughn exclaimed. "Someone must have heard the shooting." The gunfire ceased as Blackburn and his men found themselves suddenly outmatched and surrounded. Within minutes, the standoff was over, with the Rangers taking the attackers into custody. Theresa and Vaughn emerged cautiously from the shack. A tall ranger with a silver-streaked beard approached them. "Miss Greene," he asked, "your father's been worried sick. Your horse came home without you yesterday and he raised the alarm." Relief flooded through Theresa. "Captain Wilson, I've never been so glad to see anyone in my life." Captain Wilson nodded to Vaughn. "And you are, sir?" "Vaughn Galloway," he replied, holstering his weapon. "I was passing by when Miss Greene was ambushed yesterday." The ranger's eyes narrowed slightly. Galloway. The name's familiar. Vaughn met his gaze steadily. "I worked the Whitman spread near Austin a few years back. Might have crossed paths then." Wilson seemed to accept this, though Theresa sensed there was more to it. "Well, Mr. Galloway, it appears you've done Taylor a service. Blackburn and his boys have been causing trouble for months, but we've never been able to catch them in the act." Theresa stepped forward. "They work for Victor Russell, Captain. He's been trying to force my father out so he can take our water rights. These men tried to steal the money we need to pay our banknote." Wilson's expression darkened. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Greene. But with 5 witnesses to question, we might just get to the bottom of it." He turned to address his men, instructing them to secure the prisoners for transport back to town. Theresa took the opportunity to speak privately with Vaughn. "I owe you my life twice over now," she said, her voice soft. "How can I ever repay you?" Vaughn's smile was slight but genuine. "No debt between us, Theresa. I'm just glad I was there when you needed someone." Captain Wilson returned before she could respond. "We'll escort you back to your ranch, Miss Greene. Your father will be mighty relieved to see you safe." "And Mr. Galloway?" Theresa asked, not wanting to part from her rescuer so soon. "I have business in town," Vaughn said, his eyes momentarily distant. "That man I'm tracking. I need to pick up his trail before it goes cold." Disappointment welled in Theresa's chest, though she tried not to show it. "Of course. You've delayed your search long enough on my account." Vaughn mounted his horse, tipping his hat to her. "The lazy jay, you said? Perhaps I'll ride out that way when my business is concluded." Hope replaced disappointment. "We'd be honored to have you, Mr. Galloway. My father will want to thank you properly." With a nod to Captain Wilson, Vaughn turned his horse toward town. Theresa watched him go, his straight-backed figure slowly diminishing with distance. Only when he disappeared from view did she allow the Rangers to escort her home. James Greene was indeed overjoyed to see his daughter safe. A tall man with graying auburn hair and the same green eyes as Theresa, he embraced her tightly when she arrived at the ranch house. "When Penny came back without you, I feared the worst," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank God you're safe, Theresa." She recounted her adventure, emphasizing Vaughn's role in her rescue. James listened intently, his weathered face solemn. "This Galloway fellow," he said when she finished. "He sounds like a man I should meet. Without him, I'd have lost more than money yesterday." "He said he might ride out this way after he finishes his business in town," Theresa told him, trying to keep her tone casual despite the flutter in her chest at the thought of seeing Vaughn again. James nodded. "Good. We'll make him welcome. In the meantime, Captain Wilson says they're holding Blackburn and his men while they investigate Russell. It might just be the break we need." "Do you think they'll be able to prove Russell was behind it?" Theresa asked, hopeful yet doubtful. Men like Victor Russell rarely faced consequences for their actions. "Hard to say," James admitted. "Russell's got friends in high places, but with the Rangers involved, he'll at least have to back off for a while." The next few days passed in a blur of ranch work and recovery. The bank accepted their payment, securing the Lazy J for another 6 months. Theresa found herself watching the road each afternoon, hoping to see a certain black stallion approaching. On the 4th day since her return, news reached them that rocked the foundations of Taylor society. Victor Russell had been found dead in his office, a single bullet through his heart. The prime suspect was a drifter who had been asking questions about Russell around town, a man matching Vaughn Galloway's description. Theresa refused to believe it. The man who had saved her life, who had been so gentle with her injuries, could not be a cold-blooded killer. Yet doubt gnawed at her. He had admitted to tracking someone, seeking justice outside the law. That evening, as she stood on the porch watching the sunset, a rider appeared on the horizon. Even at a distance, she recognized the proud set of Vaughn's shoulders, the distinctive gait of his stallion. James joined her, his hand resting on the shotgun propped against the wall. "Is that him?" "Yes," Theresa answered, her heart racing with conflicting emotions. "Best I meet him alone first," James decided. "Go inside, Theresa." She wanted to protest, but saw the determination in her father's eyes. Reluctantly, she retreated into the house, watching through the window as Vaughn approached. The two men spoke for what seemed like an eternity, their expressions serious. At one point, Vaughn removed his hat and held it against his chest, speaking earnestly. Finally, James nodded and extended his hand. When they shook, Theresa released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her father came inside, his face thoughtful. "You can come out, Theresa. I've invited Mr. Galloway to stay for supper." Did he? She couldn't form the question properly. James understood nonetheless. "He didn't kill Russell, if that's what you're asking. But there's a story there that needs telling, and it's his to share, not mine." Vaughn was unsaddling his horse when Theresa emerged from the house. He looked up at her approach, his expression guarded until he saw her smile. "I heard about Russell," she said without preamble. "The whole town thinks you did it." Vaughn's hands stilled on the saddle cinch. "And what do you think, Theresa?" She met his gaze steadily. "I think I know a good man when I see one, and I think there's more to the story than what people are saying in town." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Your father said much the same. He's a perceptive man." "He's invited you to supper," Theresa said. "Will you stay?" Vaughn nodded, resuming his task of caring for his horse. "I'll stay, and I'll tell you both the truth of why I came to Taylor." Supper was a simple affair, beef stew, cornbread, and coffee, but the conversation was anything but simple. After they had eaten, Vaughn sat back in his chair and began his tale. "The man I was tracking was indeed Victor Russell, but I didn't kill him," he said. "I wanted answers, not vengeance. Russell led the raiders who destroyed my family's ranch during the war. They killed my father and brother, took everything we had." Theresa's heart ached for the young boy he must have been, witnessing such violence. "I've spent years following his trail," Vaughn continued. "He changed his name several times, but I finally tracked him to Taylor. I wanted him to face justice, to admit what he'd done." "And now he's dead," James said quietly. Vaughn nodded. "Shot by his own foreman, from what I heard in town. Blackburn apparently didn't take kindly to being left to hang for the ambush on your daughter. He implicated Russell before they could even question him properly." "So the Rangers know you're innocent?" Theresa asked. "They do," Vaughn confirmed. "Captain Wilson interviewed me this morning. Blackburn's confession clears me completely, though I suspect the captain still has his doubts about my intentions." James studied Vaughn thoughtfully. "And now that Russell is dead, what will you do?" It was the question Theresa had been afraid to ask. With his quest for answers ended, would Vaughn simply move on as he had so many times before? Vaughn's gaze shifted to Theresa before returning to her father. "That depends, sir. I've been a drifter for a long time, but lately I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots." Theresa's pulse quickened at his words, at the implication behind them. "The Lazy J could use an experienced hand," James said carefully. "Especially with Blackburn's gang locked up. Russell's operation will be scrambling. maybe looking to cause more trouble. "I'm handy with horses," Vaughn offered. "And I know cattle. I'd work hard for fair wages." James nodded slowly. "We can discuss terms in the morning. For now, the bunkhouse has an empty bed. You're welcome to it." After Vaughn had retired to the bunkhouse, Theresa helped her father clean up from supper. They worked in companionable silence until James finally spoke. "He watches you when you're not looking," he observed, his tone neutral, "and you do the same to him." Theresa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Pa." James held up a hand. "I'm not blind, Theresa. There's something between you two, something that started when he pulled you up from that cliff edge." She couldn't deny it. "I barely know him." "Then get to know him," her father advised. "He seems a decent man, despite the hard road he's traveled, or maybe because of it." In the weeks that followed, Vaughn proved himself an invaluable addition to the Lazy J. He had a way with the most difficult horses, breaking them gently but firmly. The other hands respected his skill and his quiet authority. And each day, Theresa found herself more drawn to him. They often rode the boundaries together, Vaughn always alert for any sign of trouble from what remained of Russell's outfit. During these rides, they talked about her dreams for the ranch, about his years of wandering, about books they'd read and places they'd seen. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stopped at the highest point of the Lazy J, overlooking the valley below. "My mother used to say that Texas sunsets were God's way of showing off," Theresa remarked, smiling at the memory. Vaughn chuckled. She wasn't wrong. "I've seen sunsets from Montana to Mexico, and there's something special about Texas light." They fell silent, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that still surprised Theresa. After a while, Vaughn spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I never expected to find peace here," he admitted. "After so many years of chasing ghosts, I thought I'd forgotten how to just be." "And now?" Theresa asked softly. Vaughn turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the golden light. "Now I find myself wanting things I never thought possible. A home. A purpose beyond vengeance." He paused, his gaze intent. "Someone to share it all with." Theresa's heart hammered in her chest. "Vaughn." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek, thumb gently stroking her skin. "I know it hasn't been long," he said, voice low, "and I'm not asking for promises, but I need you to know that my feelings for you run deeper than gratitude or circumstance." Theresa leaned into his touch. "I feel it too. Whatever this is between us, it's real." When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home after a long journey. His kiss was tender yet assured, a promise of feelings too complex for words. Theresa's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor, pouring all her unspoken emotions into the connection between them. They rode back to the ranch as twilight deepened into night, their horses walking side by side. Vaughn reached across the space between them to take Theresa's hand, and they remained that way until the lights of the ranch house came into view. James was sitting on the porch, pipe in hand, when they arrived. His knowing smile told Theresa he'd guessed the shift in their relationship before they'd even dismounted. The following months brought changes to the Lazy J. With Victor Russell's criminal activities exposed, his empire began to crumble. The bank foreclosed on his properties, and several were put up for auction. With careful management of their resources and a loan from a friendly banker in Austin, the Greene family was able to purchase the adjacent water rights that Russell had so coveted. Through it all, Vaughn remained a steadfast presence, working alongside James and Theresa to strengthen the ranch. The hands accepted him as second in command, deferring to his judgment when James was occupied elsewhere. Summer faded into autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and the cattle drive to market. The Lazy J's herd fetched good prices, securing their financial stability for the coming year. Upon their return, James announced his intention to turn more of the daily management over to Theresa and Vaughn. "These old bones need more rest than they used to," he explained when Theresa expressed concern. "And you two have proven yourselves more than capable." It was after this conversation that Vaughn asked to speak with James privately. They disappeared into the study for nearly an hour, emerging with solemn expressions that gave way to smiles when they caught sight of Theresa waiting anxiously in the hallway. That evening, Vaughn asked Theresa to ride with him to their special overlook. The October air was crisp, the stars emerging in a sky so clear it seemed to go on forever. "Your father is a remarkable man," Vaughn said as they dismounted near the edge of the ridge. "Tough but fair. I see where you get your strength." Theresa smiled. "What did you two discuss for so long this afternoon?" Vaughn took her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Your future, and mine, and whether they might be the same thing." Realization dawned, and Theresa's breath caught. Vaughn. He lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Theresa Greene, when I reached down from that cliff edge, I had no idea I was reaching for my own heart. You've shown me that there's more to life than the ghosts of the past. You've given me a future to believe in." Tears blurred Theresa's vision as he continued. "I don't have much to offer besides these hands and the promise that they'll always be there to catch you. But if you'll have me, I want to build a life with you right here on the Lazy J." "Yes," Theresa whispered, then louder. "Yes, Vaughn Galloway, I will marry you." He rose to his feet and gathered her in his arms, his kiss sealing the promise between them. When they finally broke apart, Vaughn reached into his pocket and produced a small gold ring with a modest pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slid it onto her finger. "The only thing I managed to save from our ranch. I've carried it all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." Theresa admired the simple elegance of the ring, touched beyond words at the significance of his gift. "It's perfect. I'll treasure it always." They were married on the first day of December 1875 in the small church in Taylor. The entire town turned out for the celebration, curious to see the union of Theresa Greene and the mysterious cowboy who had saved her life. Captain Wilson himself attended, seemingly satisfied that Vaughn was indeed the man of honor he claimed to be. The winter passed in newlywed bliss, with Vaughn moving from the bunkhouse to the main house. James insisted on giving the couple the master bedroom, saying he preferred a smaller room now that he was alone. "Besides," he told them with a wink, "that room has enough space for a cradle when the time comes." Spring brought new life to the Lazy J. The cattle herd expanded with the birth of calves, the fields grew green with promise, and Theresa discovered she was expecting a child of her own. When she shared the news with Vaughn, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A family," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Our family." As her pregnancy progressed, Theresa continued to help manage the ranch, though Vaughn and James insisted she take on fewer physical tasks. She focused instead on the ranch accounts and correspondence, discovering a talent for business that complemented her husband's practical skills. On a warm September evening in 1876, nearly a year after they had met, Theresa gave birth to a son. They named him Thomas James Galloway, honoring both Vaughn's father and Theresa's. "He has your eyes," Vaughn marveled as he held his son for the first time. The baby's gaze, though unfocused, was unmistakably the same shade of green as his mother's. "And your chin," Theresa observed, exhausted but radiant. "He'll be breaking hearts by the time he's 15. James, now a proud grandfather, seemed to age backward in the presence of the child. He spent hours rocking the baby, telling him stories of the early days of the Lazy J. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. By the time Thomas was walking, they had expanded their holdings and improved their breeding stock. The Lazy J gained a reputation throughout the region for quality cattle and fair dealings. 2 years after Thomas's birth, Theresa and Vaughn welcomed a daughter whom they named Margaret Rose after Vaughn's mother. The family was complete, or so they thought until the surprise arrival of twins Elizabeth and William when Thomas was 5. Through the years, Vaughn never forgot the moment that had brought them together. On each anniversary of their meeting, he would take Theresa riding to a cliff edge, though a much safer one than where they had first met. There, he would take her hand and repeat the words that had changed both their lives. "I've got you." And each time, Theresa would look into the eyes of the man she loved and respond, "Yes, you do. And I've got you too." Their children grew up steeped in the legend of their parents meeting the desperate woman hanging from a cliff edge, the cowboy who appeared just in time to save her. Thomas, in particular, loved to have his father tell the tale, complete with dramatic gestures. "And then," Vaughn would say, reaching down with his arm extended, "I looked into the eyes of the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen and said, 'I've got you,'" the children would chorus, giggling with delight. As the years passed, the Lazy J became one of the most successful ranches in the county. James lived to see his grandchildren grow into teenagers, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. He left behind a legacy of hard work and integrity that Vaughn and Theresa strived to maintain. Thomas, showing his grandfather's head for business and his father's way with horses, gradually took on more responsibility as he reached adulthood. Margaret developed a talent for breeding and raising quarter horses, establishing a side business that complemented the cattle operation. Elizabeth became a skilled veterinarian, one of the few women in the profession, while William found his calling as a rancher like his father. In 1900, 25 years after Vaughn had pulled Theresa from the edge of the cliff, they stood together on the porch of the ranch house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Gray streaked their hair now, and the years of ranch work had left its mark on their bodies, but the love between them remained as strong as ever. "Did you ever imagine this?" Theresa asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. "That day when you found me hanging from that cliff, did you ever think we'd build all this together?" Vaughn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I knew something important was happening," he admitted. "There was a moment when our eyes met that I felt like I was the one being rescued." Theresa smiled at the memory. "We saved each other, I think." "We did," Vaughn agreed, placing a kiss on her temple. "And we keep doing it every day." Their legacy continued long after both had passed from this world. The Lazy J remained in family hands, passed down through generations of Galloways, and with it passed the story of their beginning, a tale of danger and rescue, of a hand extended in the nick of time, of love blooming in the wild Texas landscape. In Taylor, Texas, the story became something of a local legend. Visitors to the town might hear an old-timer recounting the tale of the young woman who dangled from a cliff edge until a mysterious cowboy appeared to save her, and how that moment of peril led to one of the greatest love stories the county had ever known. Even a century later, descendants of Theresa and Vaughn Galloway would gather for family reunions at the old ranch, where someone would inevitably point out the distant cliff where it all began. Young family members would listen wide-eyed as they heard how their great-great-grandfather had reached down to their great-great-grandmother and spoken the words that became their family motto, "I've got you." And in the whisper of the Texas wind, it almost seemed possible to hear Theresa's reply, echoing across time, "And I've got you too." The cliff where they met eventually became known locally as Galloway Point, marked with a small plaque commemorating their story. Couples from miles around would visit the spot, some even choosing it as a place to propose marriage, drawn by the romance of that first desperate meeting. The legacy of Vaughn and Theresa Galloway lived on not just in their descendants and the continued success of the Lazy J Ranch, but in the countless lives they touched through their generosity and community involvement. The school they helped fund, the church they faithfully attended, the neighboring ranchers they assisted in hard times, all bore witness to the love that had grown from that moment of crisis on the cliff edge. In the end, theirs was not just a love story, but a testament to the power of reaching out a hand when someone needs it most. From that simple act of courage and compassion grew a dynasty, a legend, and a love that would inspire generations to come.